And now I'd like to introduce today's special guest. The newspaper headlines last week proclaimed a new chapter in Canadian history. The premiers of Quebec and Ontario, Confederations Upper and Lower Canada, had agreed on an impressive range of bilateral deals, including a trading system on greenhouse gas emissions and an increase in electrical power sales. They also set the groundwork for more uniform regulations and the reduction of restrictions on labor mobility. After their joint cabinet meeting in Quebec City, Premiers McGuinty and Charest invoked the memory of Sir John A. Macdonald, the architect of Canadian unity, who famously said, "Let us be French, let us be English, but most importantly, let us be Canadian." What does this historic coming together of two of Canada's most powerful provinces signify, and what made it happen at this time? Changing economic times present a significant opportunity for central Canada and perhaps the nation as a whole. Given the economic downturn south of the border and the pain being felt in both provinces' manufacturing cores, perhaps the time had come for Ontario and Quebec to chart their destinies together. Premier Charest's government has been one of the strongest advocates of what has been called the new economic space that involves establishing closer ties, economic ties to Europe. For Canada, that means forging closer regional ties. One of the people who has worked hardest to make sure that the provincial partners in central Canada face the future together is our guest today. Minister Bachand will speak about the regional aspirations of Ontario and Quebec and how closer ties strengthen us as a regional power, as a nation, and as an international partner. He will give us some insight into how momentum for a Canada-EU free trade deal has been growing on a national level. And he may tell us about what to expect in October when a meeting will be held in Montreal between Canada and the European Union to decide whether to embark on formal negotiations. But a bit of personal history first. Minister Bachand has an impressive resume. He was first elected to the current provincial government as a member for Outremont in a 2005 by-election and re-elected in the 2007 general election. This is not his first brush with politics, though, as he served in the late 70s and early 80s in the office of former Quebec Premier René Lévesque, and then as Chief of Staff in the office of Pierre-Marc Johnson, when he was Minister of Labour and Manpower in the early 80s. Minister Bachand has a doctorate from Harvard University and a law degree from Université de Montréal. He began his career teaching management and business, but most of his 25-year career has been spent in the private sector, as partner and CEO of Secor Consulting, as president and CEO of Quebec's largest venture capital fund, Fonds de Solidarité des Travailleurs du Québec, as vice president of Culinaire, and as VP of a major grocery chain, Metro Richelieu. He has also served on numerous boards, both corporate and not-for-profit, and brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to his present portfolio and to our audience at the Canadian Club today. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Quebec's Minister of Economic Development, Innovation, and Export Trade, the Honourable Raymond Bachand.
Merci beaucoup, Helen. I will not repeat all the names of the members of the guest and head table. Alors, tous les membres de la table d'honneur, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a true pleasure to be here today at the Canadian Club, an institution that's been for over 100 years the host of historical debates making our Canadian history. And it's also been an honor for me because this is a room of economic leaders, deciders, men and women who play a role in our society. And on a personal note, it's also always a pleasure to be back in Ontario because I spent 7 summers of my youth in Algonquin Park at Ahmek and Wampomio, if there are people that are from the Taylor-Staton camps here. But today I want to share with all of you the economic vision of our government, of the government of Quebec and its Premier Jean Charest. And this vision is based on strong and promising partnerships with our traditional allies, first among which are Ontarians, the province of Ontario and the government of Ontario. And my goal today is to convince you that current economic conditions offer an unprecedented opportunity for us to find common solutions to the challenges we both face. We must seize this opportunity, draw on our strengths, mobilize our businesses, our communities, and our governments, and everyone present here today as well as your counterparts in Quebec. The world has changed and continues to be transformed astonishingly fast. We must now adapt to these changes. The Quebec government will play its role, and in taking concrete steps will assure the prosperity of the province. We must create wealth for Quebec and clearly evaluate the impact of the challenges facing us. And these are major challenges, and you have similar challenges in Ontario, but we must use them as an opportunity to surpass ourselves, to reach higher levels of performance and take advantage of these changes for the benefits of our citizens. Yes, we're all facing a soaring Canadian dollar versus the U.S. currency, a slowdown of the U.S. economy, which is 70% of our export markets, growing competition for emerging markets and all our markets, from India, from Brazil, from China, who's become the first commercial trader now with the United States, a first in history. Yes, we're facing also, of course, the uninterrupted increase in the price of oil. And I've got numbers here, but numbers change every day, so it's probably 125. I got 130 here. And we're facing an aging population and the growing problem of availability of manpower, which leads us to look at the next economical challenges of the future, not in terms of availability of jobs, but availability of workers. But despite these changes, Quebec is doing quite well, and its economy is withstanding these unstable market forces. And Ontario is doing well enough, though there's very sad news this week in this province, and our thoughts go out to all the workers that are being laid off. But globally, if you look at our GDP, in 2003 the GDP was progressing by 1.3%. Last year it was 2.6%. Unemployment rate 5 years ago was 9.3%. In January this year it was 6.8%, the lowest in 30 years. That means that 250,000 jobs were created since April 2003. We've had a record year on man-hours work on construction sites, 126 million hours. 2008 will be the same. And we have strong growth in investment. Last year's rate was about 8.5%, and 2008 should be around 7%. Government is an economic leader, even though it's a private sector that runs businesses, but the government has a role, and we must use our resources as a leader to find solutions to economical challenges. The government will offer the infrastructures for the corporate sector to overcome these new challenges, but we will also see to it that these challenges become opportunities to build a stronger Quebec. How are we doing that? First, build infrastructures. Energy. Energy will be a key competitive strength in this century of TER. So our ambitious plan is to add another 4,500 megawatts of hydroelectricity and 4,000 megawatts of wind energy. We are making a $30 billion over the next 5 years infrastructure effort, mainly in repairs of our roads and schools and hospitals, and of course there's some new institutions in that. But our key challenge is productivity. The key to our prosperity is productivity. Productivity should become our obsession when you work in the economic sector. And what are the pillars of productivity? It's innovation, investment, a qualified workforce, and then penetrating world markets. Over the past 18 months, our economic policies have all been targeted towards these goals. In terms of innovation, 15 months ago, we've established a Quebec Research and Innovation Strategy with investments of $1.2 billion over the next 3 years. Basically, the goal of it is to enhance the excellence of public research, but basically to make innovation that comes out of university and colleges flow into SMEs, because our SMEs are less productive than the world SMEs. Our large companies are just as productive. So Quebec is a leader in Canada in R&D, and we intend to do so. In terms of investment, our government, with the help of the Caisse de dépôt and the Quebec Solidarity Fund, has completely transformed the venture capital industry to make it much more private sector in nature. In the last 2.5 to 3 years, there's 19 new private funds that were established in Montreal, representing about $3 billion of capital available. 11 of these are either Canadian or Quebec funds, but 8 are international funds which have opted to set foot in Quebec and Montreal in the venture capital industry. In our last budget, investment, second pillar, the finance minister, my colleague, announced the immediate elimination of the capital tax for the manufacturing sector to stimulate investments in modernization of companies. She also introduced an investment tax credit of at least 5%, 20 or 40, depending on the region in Quebec. And as a result, we went from a taxation system that basically penalized investment to a taxation system that rewards it. And more recently, in reaction to challenges threatening the manufacturing industry, an important $600 million action plan was introduced to support the efforts of business entrepreneurs in that sector, but always focused on innovation and training of manpower and investment, not on subsidizing plants that have to close. But we also went further in our economic strategy, and this is a background, and I'll be coming to the new economic space, by introducing sectorial strategies. Basically, it's Michael Porter's strategy, and you do it in Toronto also, the cluster theory. So we have sectorial strategies which are also targeted on innovation, investment, quality of labor, market penetration. We have an aerospace strategy. We're the Canadian leaders in aerospace, and we're also the world leaders in that field, and Montreal being one of the three important centers of the world after Seattle and Toulouse for aerospace industry. Our drug policy is one of the only policies in the world which includes a section on economic development. We even have a strategy recently for the fashion and clothing industry, but it doesn't help the $1 T-shirt plan. That's gone. That's gone to Honduras and China and wherever. That strategy focuses on creativity and focuses on markets. Montreal is a Canadian fashion leader and the third largest center in America after Los Angeles and New York. And our most recent strategy is our clean tech strategy a few weeks ago to develop what I think will become one of the most important industrial sectors in the world, the companies operating in the environmental field. And that industry in 3 or 4 years is going to be worldwide as important as the pharmaceutical industry. So as you can see, we've been quite active, and these actions have had very good results in terms of investments and investments that are coming in. But this is only one side of the coin of our economy. On the other side, of course, you have the external markets. Quebec and Canada have always prospered when developing strong economic exchanges with outside markets. That's why, under the leadership of our Premier Jean Charest, we've established an ambitious plan for a new economic space. This vision is based on 5 pillars. First, the partnership with Ontario, a reinforced partnership with Ontario. Second, the promotion of the agreement on internal trade across Canada. Third, the development of Quebec's northern strategy. We've got huge territories up to the north that have huge potential. Four, the intensification of our relations in our Atlantic Gateway, with the ambitious objective of eventually negotiating a new economic partnership between Canada and the European Union. And fifth is the signature of an agreement between France and Quebec on mutual recognition of skills and expertise for trades and professionals. So I'll give you more details in this vision. First, Ontario. We're neighbors. And our economic structures are very, very similar. We were struck in preparing the negotiations and the meetings. We face common challenges, and it's only natural that we should ally ourselves, Quebec and Ontario, in the creation of this new economic space. And why should we combine our resources? Ontario and Quebec have a combined GDP of over $880 billion. We have more than $70 billion worth of trade every year. We're the 2 major economies of Canada. Almost 2/3 of the population lives in central Canada, as Sandra has said. Together, we generate close to 58% of the Canadian GDP and over 55% of all interprovincial exports. We are the 4th largest region in North America. After California, Texas, and New York, Quebec and Ontario was the 4th largest economic region in North America. We're world-class. We have world-class industrial experts in aerospace, biopharmaceutical, information technology, automotive industry, and financial sector, in which Ontario is stronger and some Quebec is stronger. But we're both in all of these sectors. We have a manufacturing sector that share the same reality and similar challenges where we're both called upon to make important changes. We have similar forest industries. We have similar agricultural industries. And both provinces, we think, deal with very similar environmental challenges. So ours are highly integrated economies, much more than we think. As business people, you look at China and India and the United States, and in business, the first rule is, what's your closest market? Quebec's exports of goods and services to Ontario are about $31 billion. Ontario's exports of goods and services to Quebec are $39 billion. Half of all the service purchases made in Canada by Ontario are made in Quebec. But probably we love you more than you do, because 3/4 of all services purchased in Canada by Quebec are in Ontario. And many of our large companies operate in the two provinces. You know, Bombardier's got 12,000 employees in Quebec, but there's more than 4,000 employees in Ontario. And CGI has 9,000 in Quebec and more than 5,000 in Ontario, and I have a long list. Hydro-Quebec is now building a new major transmission line to increase the availability of clean energy for Ontario. So together, we're the economic heart of Canada. This is not something against Ottawa. This is something in which we together have to build our future. We're facing the same challenges, even if our identities are quite distinct and distinctly ours. And if we break down the barriers that interfere with trade between our territories, we'll reinforce our economies, our businesses, and prosper together. And these are bizarre barriers. Some barriers that have been evolved over the years, not by design, most of them, but just by accident, just because we don't look at the others. You got the bizarre thing in the transport industry. You know, it's not the same size of tires. You can't, the seasons are not the same. You have in Quebec, you can have a trailer, a tractor with two trailers. You know, when you come to the Ontario border, of course, you have to stop, take another tractor, go across, and then when you go to the United States or Manitoba, you can pin them back together again. Of course, for the environmental reasons, that's not very good. All sorts of things that came through history. It's true in the finance sector. Your regulation, the credit union industry should be modernized. Ours in the insurance industry should be modernized and harmonized. Our companies can operate in both ways. Our agricultural industries, our milk policies should be harmonized and create a new market. And yes, maybe we'll solve the margin issue that way one day. But the trust of that is if we can have our business people on both sides, when you have a plan, you think of a 30 million market. You think of Quebec and Ontario together. And that is basically changing the culture and the mindset when strategic plans are done and the way our businesses think, especially in SMEs. So if we share similar challenges, we should share in our solutions. And that's the basic message I want to leave with you today. Because if we work hand in hand in building one upon another, will increase our prosperity, will improve the quality of life of Quebecers and Ontarians. And this is a new partnership, a unique partnership, and this will not overshadow our respective identities. We'll be business partners, but we'll remain competitors on the ice. You know, the Montreal Canadiens and Toronto Maple Leafs will always be rivals, like our provinces, but they share the same challenge, having a stronger NHL. And we've done a lot of work between ourselves already, and Mr. Peterson and Michel Audette here, negotiators have been chosen. 10 meetings have already been taken place. 8 tables, 8 sectorial forums are already set up and working in labor mobility, in energy, in financial services, in transport, agriculture and food products, public markets, rules and regulations, and economic cooperation, which is something which Sandra and I, your minister and I, think that because we've got to bring down barriers, but we've got to think of the future also. How can we cooperate more in prospering in the world markets? Last Monday, for the first time in Confederation, 30 ministers from Quebec and Ontario cabinets met in Quebec City under the leadership of our 2 premiers. A cooperation protocol relating to energy has been signed. In the environment, Quebec and Ontario took a major step towards the creation of a climate market across Canada. I'll take a second on that. You know, in the cap-and-trade system, companies who successfully reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to a level below the government's targets receive carbon credits that you can sell on the market. If you're not able, of course, you have to purchase carbon credits. But it is totally unfair to choose a 2006 starting date when our companies have been making major efforts since 1990. And that's true in the aluminum industry in Quebec, and that's true in the automotive industry here, and it's true across our 2 provinces. 1990 is the Kyoto benchmark. It's the European benchmark. That's the largest cap-and-trade market in place, so let us adopt it. It's like if you had 2 marathon runners at the starting gate, you know, and one's been training for 3 years, and he runs a marathon in 3 hours and 15 minutes, and the others just come in about 6 months ago, and he runs in 7 hours, and then you say, before you leave, I must tell you, I'm going to give you a huge bonus if you reduce your time by half an hour. You know, it's an easy job for the 7-hour runner in 6 months to reduce the time to 7 hours. It's a tough job for the 3-hour marathon runner to come down to 2:30. And basically, that's what 2006 standards are doing, and they're quite unfair. We've signed protocols with regards to social services and youth also. But we've also discussed about the Ontario-Quebec Continental Gateway and the project of a high-speed train between Quebec, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, and Windsor. This is an ambitious project. It's greatly anticipated, and we want to push this forward to strengthen our economies and improve the environment. And our two premiers have also announced a framework of the Quebec-Ontario Partnership Agreement. We expect to sign this in 2009 and to transform the Quebec-Ontario Alliance, the fourth economic power on the continent. We'll be able to increase the competitiveness of our economies, better adapt to international competition, enable our corporate sector to reach new strategic alliances, and allow our governments to cooperate in key domains as energy, the environment, or scientific research. At the end of the day, if we realize that, we'll have better jobs and better quality of life for our people. We are stronger together than apart. It's in our best interest to unite in our common challenges. And if it's true for Ontario and Quebec, it's true for the country and for Canada. Canada has changed. And the Quebec government has already taken numerous steps to address these changes. In 2003, Jean Charest initiated the Council of Federation. We have asymmetrical federalism for healthcare. Quebec was recognized as a nation recently, and we now have a voice in UNESCO. You know, Quebec, and this is a speech about economy, but I have to say that it's something about Quebec as a nation will continue to grow, will continue to develop as such. The French language is the common language in Quebec and will remain as such. And more than ever, our government has a responsibility to ensure the development of the only society with a Francophone majority in North America. But as we celebrate the 400th anniversary of Quebec City, and day-to-day close by to the arrival of Samuel de Champlain, the Quebec government invites the rest of Canada to join in the realization of a common dream. And when governments act with respect, Quebec is stronger with Canada, and Canada is stronger with Quebec. Le Québec est une nation qui continuera à s'épanouir. La langue française sera la langue commune au Québec et le demeurera. Mais quand les gouvernements agissent avec respect, le Québec est plus fort avec le Canada et le Canada est plus fort avec le Québec. Le gouvernement du Québec, plus que jamais, a la responsabilité d'assurer l'épanouissement de la seule société à majorité francophone d'Amérique. Mais tout en fêtant ses 400 ans presque jour pour jour après l'arrivée de Samuel de Champlain, le gouvernement du Québec tend aussi la main au reste du Canada pour un projet commun. The second pillar of this new economic space, of course, is Canada, the East-West, the whole of the country. The intensification of the relations of this East-West market is our second element. Isn't that how the country was developed? And remember how Canada was one, the great Canadian National Project. So working on the agreement on internal trade to promote commerce and trade from East and West fits what this country should become. This is a major accord. We're working on it, and with Ontario, it includes a special section on workforce mobility that will greatly benefit all of Canada. You know, why should a Canadian carpenter, accountant, or plumber be unable to work anywhere in Canada? We believe that this is the way to the future for Canada, and every provincial premier has agreed during the last Federation Council that this would become a reality in April 2009. Our third pillar is the full development of Quebec's northern territory, which is a challenge and opportunity yet to be explored. That's why our Premier is developing a northern plan, which involves a long-term development strategy for northern Quebec. Territories offering mining, energy, as well as touristic potential that must be valued in a sustainable development perspective and, of course, in partnership with our First Nations. But we have a lot of people that have already started working in our northern part in Quebec. The fourth pillar is, of course, changing Canada-European Union relations and bringing it to another level. Now, 20 years ago, Canada signed a free trade agreement with the United States, and we'll always maintain a privileged relationship with the United States. It's been a success story, and we shouldn't keep our eye off that ball. But launched in Davos a year ago, and since then, in all his travels in Europe and throughout Canada, Premier Charest has been promoting a transatlantic trade agreement between Canada and the European Union. With the efforts of the CERT, the Canadian-European Roundtable for Business, and I salute former Minister Roy McLaren, who's here in the South, Roy, who's there, and who's leading that effort on both sides of the Atlantic. We now have 90 major corporations, 90 major CEOs, European and Canadians, that have joined the support of this major project. Last Monday in Quebec City, our two premiers, Ms. McGuinty and Charest, signed a joint declaration in favor of this new economic partnership between Canada and the EU and affirm our wish for negotiations to start taking place next October at the next Canada-EU summit, which will be held probably in Montreal in October. What we're seeking is not a traditional free trade agreement. What we're seeking is a 21st century partnership agreement with exchange of students, researchers, experts, mobility of manpower, harmonization of norms, opening of public markets, so that the corporations of Canada and Europe will become more productive and labor markets more efficient. Now, these efforts, of course, have been done in close cooperation with the federal government, which will, of course, lead this project. This is, at the end of the day, a Canadian and the federal government jurisdiction, and my efforts are always coordinated with David Emerson, with whom I speak regularly. Our fifth pillar is what we're doing in France, and I'll just say a note to that, because we seek to conclude a joint agreement with France regarding recognition of trades and professional skills. Why would a doctor, an engineer, a nurse, a carpenter trained in France not be able to practice his profession or trade in Quebec without any other formalities or very limited formalities? And at the end of the day, if we succeed doing that with France and with Ontario and within Canada, then maybe we'll treat the immigrants from around the world a bit more decently in the way when they come to this country, so they can work, because that's the basic of human dignity. So this is the new economic space we wish to create for Quebec, and by definition for Ontario and for Canada. The late Senator Robert Kennedy, assassinated 40 years ago today, used to say, and I might be paraphrasing, some people see the world as it is and say, why? I see the world as it should be and ask, why not? Well, I see the world of the future with a strong Quebec, Ontario economic strength, a strong Quebec-Ontario link, a strong Canadian economy, a new partnership between Canada and Europe. And I say, why not? And if we could dream a little, we could dream and have a vision of a true transatlantic market between Europe and North America, a market of more than 800 million people with similar values forged through a shared history, which would make our corporations more productive and stronger to better compete in the world markets. But let us begin. Let us begin by building the first steps of this vision. The world has changed, and we now must change our approaches. Once, the best for Quebec meant only recognizing our values, our language, our culture, our identity. But today, now that Quebec is stronger, prouder, and more confident in its identity, its distinctiveness in the world, its future is based on the values of openness and alliances within Canada, but also from Quebec, Ontario, and Canada within the world. The Quebec government has taken this initiative on the new economic space because we're forward-looking. This ambitious project meets, we believe, the challenges Quebec is now facing. It's a vision of a new partnership that will definitely contribute to the reinforcement of the Canadian economy. New markets, new people, fresh ideas will come together and help build our economies. And this new economic space is deeply rooted in Canada's reality. And today in Quebec, Premier Jean Charest and his government, while we will fiercely defend the province's distinct character, will also share a common destiny within Canada. And if the world has changed and Canada has changed, Quebec has changed also. And in the face of globalization, we have a window in history, we have a time in history and an opportunity to think outside of the box and work together to change the ways we do business. Monday, for the first time in Canada history, the governments of Ontario and Quebec held this joint cabinet meeting in Quebec City. And as Prime Minister Premier McGuinty said, today our two provinces wrote another page in the history of Quebec City for its 400th anniversary. It is a powerful symbol that marks the start, we believe, of a new era of future collaboration. Not unlike the times of Mr. Peterson and Bourassa, this project provides momentum to our society. Today, Premiers McGuinty and Charest initiate a new way of working together based on openness, partnership, joining forces. But to succeed, this approach must be communicated by everyone involved, starting with our economic leaders. We must all rise to this challenge and be part of its success. Cooperation between Quebec and Ontario is much more than a new economic partnership. It's a model that everyone will look up to in the future. Thank you for your attention.
I'd now like to call on Chris May, board member of the Canadian Club, to formally thank the minister.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you all for joining us today. À tous et à toutes qui nous avec nous aujourd'hui, merci. The Right Honourable Lester B. Pearson once said that the destiny of Canada is to unite, not divide. L'idéal de ce Canada uni qui joue un rôle international est profondément ancré dans notre histoire et fondé sur l'affinité, la conciliation et le but commun. As Canada looks outward in the desire to play its role as a full trading partner in the global village, we also need to strengthen the bonds that hold us together regionally and nationally. And recent events mark a turning point in Canadian history. The new economic space, of which Minister Bachand has spoken so eloquently today, would include a Canada-EU free trade deal. But the window to that new economic space must first be opened here, as is being done by our leaders in Ontario and Quebec. Le but de notre Confédération canadienne s'en trouve réaffirmé avec les bénéfices qui s'étendent au-delà du centre du Canada à l'ensemble du pays et qui assurent notre avenir au sein de la communauté internationale. Monsieur le ministre, merci d'avoir été des nôtres aujourd'hui à Toronto. Votre discours a réaffirmé que nos buts sont vraiment en commun. Your speech today has reaffirmed for us that we do, in fact, share common goals. In fact, we are family. And to our dear friends, the citizens of Quebec, à l'occasion de ce grand rassemblement de la francophonie canadienne qui célèbre les 400 ans d'histoire de Québec, we wish you a very warm bonne fête. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Chris. And I just want to advise you that today's speech will be broadcast on Rogers TV, so please watch for it in the days to come. On behalf of the Canadian Club, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Je me remercie de nous joindre aujourd'hui, and this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all for being here. Merci et bonne journée.